First, I want to express condolences to the Cockburn family, and really appreciated Andrew Cockburn's comments about my tribute to Alex. It meant quite a bit to me. I first met Alex probably about 15 years ago, and that was about the time that Counterpunch was starting to get underway, and Jeffrey and Alex were very much involved in launching that Counterpunch. And at the same time, there was a struggle developing in Liverpool, England, with the dock workers there being locked out. And so we, longshoremen in the Bay Area, carrying on the proud tradition of Harry Bridges and the militancy that followed the 1934 strike, organized a solidarity action in the Port of Oakland with the Liverpool dock workers. That was considered illegal under Taft-Hartley, and we were brought to court, sued by the maritime bosses. And this is where I really appreciated somebody like Alex Cockburn, because he wasn't just a journalist, he was a partisan in the class struggle. He not only wrote and supported the struggle of the Liverpool dock workers and the defense of the Oakland longshoremen, but he came to our rallies and spoke. Of course, he wasn't the only one to do that. He did that because he believed in the cause. There were opportunists like Jerry Brown, who was running for mayor at the time and had to establish working class credentials, and Ignacio de la Fuente, the president council member of the Oakland City Council. They also marched. But interesting thing is that while they were with us, taking over the streets and protesting against the charges against our union, when Occupy last November shut down the port with 40,000 or so people occupying the port, they were opposed to it.
Yep.
That's why I call them hypocrites. In fact, Ignacio de la Fuente tried to get a law passed in Oakland to stop the port from being shut down. After 9/11, and Alex and Jeffrey were really good at covering ILWU actions, always militant and always principled. And in 2002, this was like 6 months after 9/11, after the World Trade Center was attacked, we began our negotiations. Well, Bush was in the White House. They called the leadership of the ILWU and they said, if you dare to shut down the ports on the West Coast, we will consider this a national security issue and the ports will be occupied by troops. This was a serious threat, and it was only known to the leadership. I was in the leadership of Local 10 at the time, the Bay Area Longshore Local. And I called Alex, I said, Jesus Christ, you know what's going on here, Alex? This national security business is really getting out of hand. We need to get the word out. And so I told Alex exactly what was going on, and he said, we're going to get on this right away and get an article out. I called him back the next day to say, listen, if you put that article out, I will probably be brought up on charges and maybe even expelled from the union. So let's talk about this before you do that. And Alex said, you know, this is too important an issue. We need to make it public. We need to get public support behind the longshore union. And that's the way Bridges and the old-timers did it. When there was an attack by the government or by the capitalists, they organized by getting the word out to the labor movement and to the communities to support the union. So we went ahead and well, Alex and Jeffrey published an article in Counterpunch and exposed this government attack. They also covered the 2003, the start of the Iraq War. The biggest protest in this country, the most meaningful protest, because there were protests all over the world, millions of people demonstrating against the war in Iraq. But here in this country, the most militant demonstration took place in the port of Oakland, where thousands of people came to stop the shipment of war goods. And longshoremen stood by. As per our contract, we have the right to stand by and not cross these picket lines. And the police attacked. It was a very violent and bloody attack. People were shot with non-lethal weapons. And the UN Human Rights Commission characterized it as the most violent attack and repression of people's civil liberties. In fact, the newspapers reported it as a police riot. It wasn't a riot. It was well planned out in advance. The ACLU had written a surveillance report about what's happening around the national security state and all the repression by police agencies that's taking place. And that was done through, the ACLU report underscored that there was a meeting between the California Anti-Terrorism Information Center, Jerry Brown, who was then mayor, and the maritime bosses. And so this was a calculated attempt to repress people's rights. However, I have to say on a positive note that 5 years later, in 2008, and I'm very proud of this, the Longshore Union, all of this is well documented in the pages of Counterpunch. Just put in ILW in the search box and you'll get all this. But 5 years later, we wreaked sweet revenge on the powers that be. For the first time in the history of this country, there was a strike against imperialist war. We shut down every port on the West Coast to demand an end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and to bring the troops back.
Yay! Woo!
Tremendous respect for Alex, I always have. I always loved his exuberant appetite to swim against the stream, and he was a real internationalist. In the 70s and 80s, he stood strong against the anti-Soviet hysteria that was taking place under the Carter and Reagan regimes. First and foremost, I remember his position on El Salvador. A lot of the sort of liberal progressive Democrats were for a negotiated settlement in El Salvador. Not Alex. He said victory to the Salvadoran leftist guerrillas against the death squad government there, that the U.S.
Yeah.
And then again, probably what he's, one of the things he's most well known for politically is his stand on Afghanistan. In the press clip section of the Village Voice in 1980, Alex wrote, "We all have to go one day, but pray God let it not be over Afghanistan." And then he went on to say, "I yield to none in my sympathy to those prostrate beneath the Russian jackboot. But if ever a country deserved rape, it's Afghanistan. Nothing but mountains filled with barbarous ethnics with views as medieval as their muskets and unspeakably cruel too." And he caught quite a bit of wrath for that. He was right, and he won my sympathy, my affection. And a week later, he came out in that same column and said that people. What he warned is never go for irony. People take you seriously. For the record, there are good Afghans as well as bad. And he went on to explain that. So, just to finish up here, I want to say that one of my favorite works by Alex, and probably what he's most well known for, is Corruptions of Empire. And Alex was a lover of the romantic poets, the English romantic poets. And so I want to dedicate to Comrade Alex from Shelley, the poem Rosalind and Helen. And it was recited in 2002 by ILW's class struggle militant who went back to the 1948 strike. He was in a wheelchair, and he was a comrade of mine by the name of Asher Harrer. And he spoke at the Solidarity Rally in 2002 when the Bush administration was attempting to threatening to occupy the ports if we took any kind of strike action. Fear not, the tyrants shall rule forever, or the priests of the bloody faith. They stand on the brink of that mighty river, whose waves they have tainted with death. It is fed from the depth of 1,000 dells. Around them it foams and rages and swells. And their swords and their scepters I floating see, like wrecks in the surge of eternity.